All right, welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most important and honestly tragic periods in American history. It's a time when a revolution was started but was never truly finished.
So what happens when a revolution is left unfinished? I mean, just imagine trying to completely redefine a nation after a devastating war, with this incredible goal of real equality, only to run headfirst into old, stubborn power structures and deep-seated prejudice. That, right there, was the central challenge of Reconstruction, a time of immense promise that ended in profound betrayal.
You see, after the Civil War, the goal was, well, it was huge, absolutely monumental. This wasn't just about putting bricks back together. It was about integrating 4 million newly freed people into the fabric of the nation as citizens with actual rights. For that time, this was a totally revolutionary idea.
And right here, you see the central problem of the whole era. On one side, you have the promise of true freedom, of a whole new life. But on the other, you have the hard reality. The old Southern planter class still owned the land. And in that society, land wasn't just wealth, it was power. So without it, that promise of freedom just hit a brick wall right from the start. And that dependency on the landowners created the perfect setup for a trap. A very sophisticated trap, not built with physical chains, oh no. This one was built with economics, designed to control labor and basically deny any real freedom.
The so-called solution that was put on the table was a system called sharecropping. And, on the surface it sounded kind of fair. Landowners provide the land and tools, tenants provide the labor, and everyone splits the profits. But in reality, it became a devastating tool of economic bondage.
Here's how the trap worked. A family would start the year getting supplies, tools, seeds, food, on credit from the landowner, usually at sky-high prices. After a whole year of backbreaking work, the landowner takes his share, typically half the crop. Then, after he deducts the debt for the supplies, the tenant family was often left with nothing, or even worse, they were deeper in debt than when they started, and that meant they were tied to that land for another year.
And let's be really clear here. This system wasn't an accident. It wasn't something that just kind of happened. It was a deliberate design. The sources describe it as exactly what it was, another form of coerced servitude, something that mirrored slavery in almost everything but the name.
And this whole economic system was then locked into place by the law. Southern states started passing what were called the Black Codes. These laws made it illegal for black people to borrow money to buy land, basically forcing them into sharecropping. They also couldn't testify against whites in court, leaving them with absolutely no legal recourse. These codes were, for all intents and purposes, legal cages built to enforce a racial hierarchy. So when the economic pressure and the legal cages weren't enough, the old Southern power structure turned to a far more brutal tool: organized, systematic violence. And the timeline of this violent pushback it's just startling. Think about it. Just 2 years after slavery is officially abolished, the Ku Klux Klan is founded. A year after that, you have these horrific events like the Camilla Massacre, where black citizens were openly attacked and killed just for trying to exercise their new right to vote.
And we have to be absolutely clear about the Klan's purpose here. This was not random violence. It was targeted political terrorism. The whole goal was to intimidate black voters, their white allies, and any politician who supported Reconstruction, using pure fear to wrestle back political control.
Alongside this kind of mob violence, another, more systemic form of control popped up: convict leasing. States would use the Black Codes to arrest African American men for really minor offenses, like being unemployed or breaking a contract, and then lease them out as forced labor to private companies, like mines and railroads. The conditions were often even more brutal than slavery, with just staggering mortality rates. This system weaponized the courts to create a new, disposable workforce. As the source material puts it so bluntly, this was, quite simply, slavery under another name. So let's recap. You've got economic traps, legal cages, and outright terrorism on the ground. The final piece of this tragic puzzle, the ultimate betrayal, came from the very institutions that were supposed to protect these new rights: the federal government itself. The Supreme Court was a huge player here, systematically taking apart federal protections. First, in the slaughterhouse cases, the court ruled that the 14th Amendment didn't really protect citizens from their own state governments. Then, in a case called U.S. v. Cruikshank, it ruled the federal government couldn't prosecute individuals, like KKK members, for civil rights violations. That's pretty much a green light for private terrorism.
So as the courts are chipping away at legal protections, the political will up north just begins to fade. People were tired of the constant conflict. They were distracted by economic panics and the rise of big industry. And the really hard, expensive work of remaking the South, well, it just fell way down the list of priorities.
And this all came to a head in the Compromise of 1877. To settle a really messy, disputed presidential election, a backroom deal was struck. The Republican candidate, Hayes, gets the presidency. The price? He had to remove the last of the federal troops from the South, and those troops were the final line of defense for black rights. That deal, it officially marked the end of Reconstruction.
So yeah, Reconstruction failed in its immediate goals. It was a profound failure. But its story doesn't just end there. We have to look at the complicated, long-term legacy it left behind, which you might call a dormant seed.
The short-term failure was catastrophic. It ushered in nearly a century of Jim Crow segregation and disenfranchisement. But, and this is the crucial point, the 14th and 15th Amendments, the ones guaranteeing equal protection and voting rights, were now part of the Constitution. They were ignored, they were suppressed, they were violated, but they did not disappear.
And that's the long game, right? The principles of that revolution lay like a dormant seed inside the nation's own constitution. For decades, they were buried and ignored, but they held the potential for future growth, just waiting for a new generation to come along and cultivate them.
And those dormant seeds, the 14th and 15th Amendments, they would become the legal foundation for the civil rights movement almost a century later. So it raises this powerful question, doesn't it? What does this tell us about the long, multi-generational fight for justice? Well, it seems to suggest that even when a revolution is left unfinished, its core principles can endure, waiting with an almost inevitable power for the day they'll be called upon again.